We can go to the next slides, John. So we will be having 3 speakers. Today we are joined by Madam Yao Korogom Fatimata, who is Secretary General of the Ministry of Mine of Niger. We will be also having Ivan Schultz, who is from a program researcher from SwissAid. He will be joining us also today, and we're also joined by Estelle Levin-Nali from Levin Sources, which will be our 3rd speaker today. So the Menti survey will be run after the moderator setting of the scene. So we will have 5 minutes of that, and then we'll have the 10 minutes for Mentimeter. And then the 3 panelists will go one after the other. And then we'll have a moderated discussion with the panelists, and then the floor will be open to the audience, and there will be a short closing remarks. At the end of the Menti, we'll have a survey. At the end of the webinar, sorry, not the Menti. At the end of the webinar, we're going to have a survey, and we kindly ask you to take a few moments to complete it. It's a very short one. It takes about 3 minutes, but your feedback is very important. It helps us to improve the quality of our webinars going forward. So we kindly ask you to take a few moments to complete the survey at the end of the webinar. So thanks again, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from wherever you are joining us today. My name is Jonathan Amisi. I am a senior policy advisor at the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals, Metals, and Sustainable Development. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, Tracking the Hidden Golds, Addressing Illicit Financial Flow in Artisanal and Small-Scale Gold Mining. So thank you for taking time to join this discussion. We know it does touches on one of the most complex and sensitive issues in the gold sector. Illicit financial flows, or IFFs, intersect with governance, security, livelihoods, taxation and government revenue, regional dynamics in ways that vary significantly across contexts. Because of this, today's session is not intended to somewhat present a fixed IGF position, nor to offer definitive conclusions, but rather our objective is to listen, to learn, and better understand how our member countries, partners, and the wider public frame these issues, and where you believe the IGF can make the most meaningful contributions going forward. As many of you know, the IGF has already begun exploring this topic. In 2022, we published the report Illicit Financial Flow and Conflicts in Artisanal and Small-Scale Gold Mining, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. This study examined how ASGM activities in border region is affected by insecurity. It's outlined the diverse pathway through which gold leaves formal channels and proposed targeted recommendations for decision makers. Following its publication, the IGF held a follow-up workshop and a national dialogue in Niger, and we are very pleased to have Niger joining us today to share the progress that has been made since then, as well as lessons learned that may be relevant for other countries that are navigating similar challenges. To broaden the perspective in today's conversation, we're also delighted to have SwissAid and Levin Sources, 2 organizations that have carried out significant research on illicit financial flow in ASGM. So they will be presenting some of the key findings from their research. They will be offering valuable insights into the driver and dynamics of IFFs and how they manifest with artisanal supply chains. So throughout this webinar, we would invite you to participate in a Menti survey. This interactive tool will allow us to capture your reflections in real time, including how you perceive IFF, what you consider the main drivers, and which area you believe the IGF should prioritize. So your contribution through Menti will be extremely helpful and valuable, and it will inform and shape our future work on this topic. After the presentations, we'll open the floor for discussion. We recognize that this is a sensitive subject, particularly in a region where state presence is limited, where communities depend heavily on ASGM for their livelihood, and where criminality, security, and political dynamics are evolving. So our goal today is to maintain a respectful, balanced, and constructive dialogue grounded in facts and open to diverse viewpoints. So in closing this, setting the scene, I encourage you all to participate actively. Your inputs, whether through the discussion or the Menti questions, will help us determine which specific area related to IFF you believe we should focus in the months ahead. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm very much looking forward to rich and thoughtful discussion. So let us begin. So we'll be starting with the Mentimeter. So John, if you could pull out the Menti. So please scan the QR code, or you can also join by using the browser and using the code that is there. And we can give it another 20, 30 seconds while you're joining the Menti. So the Menti will be in English, but there will be translation in English, in French and Spanish. So maybe we could now start the Menti presentation. And again, as I said, some of these questions is really to help us to understand the different dynamics, perspectives, and where you believe the IGF should maybe do more research and trying to understand the IFF in ASGM. Okay, it's very, very diverse region from where people are joining today. Oh, great. A few from Asia, Dominican Republic, from South America. Oh, excellent. I'm gonna give it maybe another 20 seconds on this question. We've got about 79 attendees, but only we've got 31st, but maybe some of you are joining in group. I'll leave a little bit of time again for this one. Okay, maybe we can go to the next question. Again, this information will allow us to sort of have a better idea from which perspective you're approaching the question based on also the kind of organization you work, the kind of work that you conduct. And we very much appreciate your contribution in our research by answering the survey. Yeah, you can still also join the Menti by using the browser. So it's menti.com, and the code is in the chat. So if you caught up with us a little bit later, you will still be able to answer the questions. I give it a few more seconds. Maybe when we get to 41 answers, we can get to the next. Yeah, maybe we can go to the next slide. The next question. Yeah, so what type of organization are you working for? Interesting to see the distribution and the interest in the topic. Looks like government is winning at the moment. other. Yeah, we're gonna leave it a few seconds. Oh, almost got, we now have one trader at least. It's good, excellent. Good to hear from that perspective too. There's a question in the chat about the electronic address. So if you just read up a little bit in the chat, you can connect by using menti.com and then the codes to connect it in the chat. You will still be able to catch up on the Menti if you want to participate. Maybe we can go to the next question. So this is more about our ASGM, our AFF in the ASGM should be framed. And you will also have the possibility, if none of the options that are offered are the ones that you believe it should be framed, you'll have the possibility to give a free answer. That's the next question. Or maybe it's the second next, but you will anyway have the opportunity to give your own perspective if it is not listed here. Again, if you are joining a little bit later, just check the Menti. The code is in the chat, and you can always catch up and participate and give your perspective. It is very important for us to have this perspective from the different actors in the supply chain, because it also helps us to shape our work and the questions that we would address in the future in our research. Yeah, we got 28. Maybe let's see if we can get to 40. It's going up. Looks like at the moment, large-scale financial crime and social issues are winning. Okay, then maybe we can go to the next question. So now, based on the issues that were listed previously, please rank in order of urgency which one you think should be addressed first, and so on. So from the most urgent to the one that should be last. Actually, not really last in terms of importance, but maybe the most important one is probably the one I should talk about. I can see some are also responding in the chats. But if you're using your computer, please do your ranking and submit. We've got 22 respondents so far. 24, we can try and see if we can get to maybe 30, 35. And then we go to the next question. And again, if you're joining us a little bit late, you can always connect to the Menti and respond at your own pace time. Okay, we've got 34, 35. Yes, I guess maybe we can go to the next question. The link for the Menti is slightly higher up in the chat, but maybe John, you could help us to copy and paste once more. Now, if any of the factors that were mentioned previously is not the way you believe IFF in ASGM should be framed, now you have the opportunity to give your own perspective. So this is more of a free answer question. Then I give it a few more minutes, as this one is more of a typing kind of answer, but you can keep it short to just a few words. And you can, I think you can give 3, 4, even 5 answers if you wish to this one. Give it a few more seconds. Get 14 answers. We're gonna try and get to 25, 30 with this one. Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah, I think maybe we're gonna go to the next question, but please feel free to continue typing in. Now, when it comes to the work that we do at the IGF, who also wants to know which area you would like to see the IGF prioritizing its future work on IFF in ASGM. It is always interesting to know where the experts working in the field or the wider public believe research should be prioritized, because that also helps us to shape our own timeline with how we prioritize research. I think there were still a few questions about the Menti address. So if you read up in the chat, you'll find the link and the QR code. Yeah, I think governance and formalization seems to be sticking out from the crowd. Yeah, I think maybe we're gonna get maybe to 40 and then go to the next, which normally should be the last. So maybe we can move to the next. It's clearly showing that governance and formalization seems to be sticking out. If there is any other area where you would like to see the IGF prioritize its future work, which one would it be if it was not previously listed? So here you have the opportunity to give your own answer. And if you do not have your own answer right now, the Menti will remain open, so you can type during the presentations. So that gives us the opportunity to start off. Thank you very much for contributing to this Menti. It's really provided us also some sort of guidance, as mentioned, because there has been there is more and more discussion about IFF in ASGM. and in the gold sector in general. It's important for us to know which area either the expert or the wider public believe is important for the IGF to prioritize work. So I guess with this, we will end the presentation, but please continue to type in your answers. We're simply gonna switch now to the presentations. And to start, I'm very delighted to invite Esther Levin-Nally, I always have to say full name, to tell us about the work that Levin-Source has been doing in the context of IFF in ASGM, and what sort of recommendation you believe would be beneficial for, of course, IGF country member, but also the wider audience listening today. So the floor is yours. Over to you.
Jonathan, thank you so much. I hope everybody can see my screen. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. Today, I'm going to dive into a specific aspect of illicit financial flows, which is how do you categorize and classify bad actors? What motivates them to get involved in the artisanal sector, but also especially in gold? What are the pathways through which they do that? But also the angle I want to take is, and what does that look like for industrial miners? Because I think industrial miners are a really important element in influencing what happens with bad actor influence, but are also adversely impacted by the presence of bad actors. And we see that through our work at Levin-Sources, helping them build strategies and plans for managing ASM issues to mutual advantage with ASM communities. So that's going to be my unique angle. Yes, there we are, sorry. So let's just dive in to why Levin-Sources is here talking about illicit financial flows. Since I founded the business in 2010, we've done a wide range of projects on illicit financial flows. And I'm going to gradually just flick through these as I'm talking. And it began with my own experience on conflict minerals back in 2004. And so, of course, conflict minerals, whether that was diamonds or gold or coltan, were my focuses back then. There are various ways in which bad actors interface with minerals production, trade, financing, etc. So I began to unpack the kind of a political economy structural framework for how you make sense of that. And we went on in 2017 to establish the Gold and Illicit Financial Flows project with the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, thanks to funding from the German government. And we ran a range of case studies in Philippines, Mongolia, and Sierra Leone, but very importantly, produced a toolkit, which I really want to draw your attention to today, because although it's old, it's still very valuable. And we wanted to produce this because we could see that there was so much money about to pile into dealing with the formalization and development of artisanal and small-scale gold mining. But nobody was talking about vested interests and the political economy around existing structures and how that may or may not prevent the success of these programs that were coming in. Because through intervention, you may destabilize the interests of powerful actors that either for political or economic reasons are embedding themselves in an illicit fashion into ASGM value chains.
Sorry, Estelle, sorry to interrupt you. There seems to be an issue with the audio. There are a few people saying that they cannot hear you properly.
Right. Is this better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, I apologize for that. Well, you've not missed much yet. Don't worry, there's another 14 minutes to go. So I really want to encourage people to look at that. And that tool has built a kind of conceptual framework that we use in our advice for industrial miners, that we use when we're doing baselines or strategic assessments for governments that are trying to figure out how to approach governance better and so on. And that has underpinned some of the other work that you see here that Levin-Sources has done, either on the market linkages between illicit or informal ASM activities and the downstream markets, or through how industrial miners are managing ASM or trying to manage ASM in some extremely challenging contexts where the level of penetration of bad actors is significant. And in the cases of the two mining companies that I'm referring to here, became worse and worse over time, creating operational disruption, creating security issues, and ultimately, unfortunately, contributing to the likelihood of human rights abuses and violations locally. And then most recently, we've been working on the intersection of fragility and violence with mining through work for the Global Investor Commission for Mining, through work for the World Bank, and also most recently for donors trying to understand the interaction between supply chains and conflict dynamics in the Sahel and Nigeria. So it's quite a broad set of angles and vantages we bring onto illicit financial flows. So I'm going to take us a big step up. I know Ivan's going to dive into real concrete examples for you. I want to give you a way of thinking about this. So who are bad actors? How do we classify them and make sense of them? We broadly classify them into 6 categories, 4 of which are non-state. 3 of which are non-state. 1 is semi-state, and the other 2 are state-based. In the case of non-state armed groups, the way they operate is also how many of the violent extremist groups or transnational organized crime groups also interact with the sector. So I'm going to describe that first, and then I'll tell you how the other 2 are a little bit different. So in the case of non-state armed groups, they exercise control, or they exercise partial control over mine sites, and may take some type of shareholding in mining activities, or actually physically occupy and manage access to and from the mine site. They will establish a form of shadow economy and shadow governance over the sector and how it's managed. They may impose taxes. They may enforce certain types of norms of what's allowed and what's not allowed. They may take a role in resolving disputes amongst miners or amongst miners and other parties. And they may have a role in directing or regulating the movement of people, goods, but also the product itself. Interestingly, they also may collaborate or coexist with state actors, with local intermediaries, rival armed groups, or if you look at the bottom, with state actors who may be rogue and not serving the interests of the state anymore, or may be corrupted and needing to work with armed groups in order to protect their illicit activities. Now, in addition to that way of working, in the case of violent extremists or terrorists, there is the additional aspect of imposition of religious norms at mine sites. And in the case of transnational organized crime groups, based on what we've been learning from our research, is that there's greater likelihood of raids and just opportunism, so diving in and out of ASM areas to seek benefit, finance, food, whatever, as well. I won't have time to dive into the other few, but what I do want to say is that 11 Sources is going to be converting what we've developed for you here into a white paper with greater detail. And I should really acknowledge the work of my colleague Yara Bax, who's been leading much of our work on this at 11 Sources recently, and has been leading the authorship of that and supporting me with this presentation. So please stand by for that to come out in the next few weeks. Now, I want to put you in the shoes of an ASM actor. We have to understand it from an ASM individual entity's point of view. And what you see here is part of a training I do usually for mining companies on how to think like a miner. And it's when you're acting as an ASM operator, here's all the problems you face. In the inner circle are the things that you in theory should be able to control. So they're intrinsic risks to the business. And then in the exterior are risks that affect you and over which you have far less control, but really can impact you adversely. And what this slide shows you in the context of illicit financial flows and bad actors is all of these problems are opportunities for a bad actor to solve and capitalize upon to their own interests. Let's think about the project lifecycle. So you have an operational artisanal small-scale mine or mining site, and the different ways that bad actors may seek to extract value from that production system. Well, let's start in the middle, just on the basis of actually the miners operating. They may take a shareholding in the pit or in the mine site activity, and in return, they will demand a fixed portion of production. So they actually take a tithe of, let's say, the gold that comes out of it, or they may actually outright own it altogether, in which case they would own the product. This allows them to become structurally embedded into the mining operations. In this case, they are in fact a miner. And This is a more form of regular income and therefore is preferential for armed groups that seek to exert control over a particular territory for political reasons. But also it can be very economically lucrative because it gives more predictable income. In addition to extracting value through actually integration in the mining operation itself, they may take a territorial protection role. We actually see this a lot with our work in protected areas, where we talk about protection economies around protected areas, where sometimes those authorities that are supposed to be protecting the integrity of the protected area become enabling of the illegal artisanal mining that happens within the protected area because they will take bribes. And so any place where you have often a public or private security force that has a responsibility for managing access to a site, they may become corrupted to facilitate access to either bad actors or to illicit artisanal small-scale miners. Now, when you look at the inputs, what do we need in order to mine besides access to the land? Well, you saw that on the previous slide, security is an issue. So bad actors often provide security and protection and position themselves as the ones that will support the miners against state forces who may be coming to enforce the law to try and close the ASM down, or against site security of industrial miners. They may also, unfortunately, use forced labour in order to, in a coercive fashion, get very cheap labour to allow them to maximise profit, or to use it as a form of punishment for individuals who either politically or socially violated their norms and rules. And then when you look downstream with the product, you can see that they will take control over the trading practices, also the financial practices that should have been in inputs, but also the movement of the gold, so where, or the rubies or whatever, where is that moving to, who is it to be sold to, what prices will we pay to you if we are involved in the trading supply chain. And they may also have some kind of ownership stake or participation in processing or in logistics, and exert taxation and informal levies, particularly in transportation routes. And we've seen that in Chad and Niger in relation to we're building understanding of the ASM situation for mines operating in the Sahel. So why is it like this? Oopsie. I hope the translators know how to say oopsie in French and Spanish. So we're about to publish work for the Global Investor Commission for Mining 2030, helping educate investors in the financial community on the pathways through which they can constructively support the sustainable development of ASM. And in that report, this is how we really simplify the barriers to ASM becoming economically productive, economically stable, and a pathway to the human development of the communities where it happens. And I think we'll be talking a bit about some of this later, so I'm not going to dive into it. But the point is there are some really structural issues that are prevalent across many ASM economies and polities that make it more likely for ASM to be captured by bad actors. I'm not going to have time to dive into each of these, but let me just pop into a couple of them. So the first reason that ASM become vulnerable to capture to bad actors, why is it even possible, is because in many ASM situations, there is a governance vacuum. ASM may be in remote areas. I think this is one of the options that Jonathan came up with, actually, but it may be in remote areas where there is weak state presence or only incidental, occasional state presence. The state cannot play a role to not just enforce the law, but to support the artisanal miners to actually develop and deal with the challenges they face as business entities. And they may find that in that vacuum, they need other forms of stabilizing authority to support them deal with the problems they face. And that allows bad actors to step in to support with mediation, to support with the defense of customary rights or the norms, the enforcement of norms that bad actors will establish in order to give some predictability to people in such societies. We can't avoid the poverty question, that the point that Jonathan mentioned earlier, that ASM are frequently marginalised and vulnerable because of that poverty. There's a whole host of reasons for that. And in that context, thinking of the earlier slide, bad actors can position themselves as problem solvers, saviors, protectors to make the ASM's lives easier and better. And then you have the opportunistic element. And I could see from some people's answers that this is what's really on your mind, is the fact that there are just some people that see these issues and go, great, that's an opportunity, either for me to launder money, or for, not that I do, but for them to launder money, or either for them to achieve a political or ideological objective. These things go together. Now, gold is particularly vulnerable to capture by bad actors, but so are precious gemstones. And some of our work on IFFs has been in relation to rubies, emeralds, and other high-value precious gemstones. So you may think about those as being similar, very similar to gold in these respects. So firstly, the reason gold is particularly vulnerable is because gold is essentially money. And as such, it allows the proceeds of other illicit activities to be laundered through gold, which, because of the level of opacity in gold supply chains, the fact that at the point of the refiner, we lose all traceability, making it impossible for downstream actors to conduct due diligence. I just had a conversation with a jeweler yesterday on this as a key point of frustration and difficulty for them to drive sustainability up their value chains, including in ASM sourcing. And so that means that it's very easy for dirty gold to become licit gold at some point, and for that, because that history could be lost. Gold is also very, very valuable. It's a safe investment, and it's a very important and attractive part of the broader commercial financial strategy of a group of businesses that may be making their money primarily in other pieces of the economy, but want a gold play in order to manage financial issues they have because they may be largely illicit, or because they're in a state where the banking system doesn't work very well, is very expensive, or whatever else. And then lastly, because gold isn't adequately regulated across the value chain, it makes it more possible for bad actors to access it. Now, for large-scale miners, what this means is there are some really concrete impacts on their ability to manage ASM in a way that helps them bring down the risks for them as a commercial enterprise, but also bring down the risks for their affected stakeholders, basically the ASM who are on or near their concessions, or the community leaders and vulnerable community members who are affected by the activities of the ASM and by the large-scale mine. The penetration of bad actors has leads to these common impacts, and I want to give you a very quick story about a mine that we worked with in relation to barriers to meaningful stakeholder engagement. When we arrived on site, they were a bit worried about us actually going and directly meeting with the artisanal miners, the migrant populations that were financing them and buying the product. And they, in the first instance, for protocol reasons, also we went to meet local community leaders, the chiefs and the local political authorities. And what we learned very quickly was that they really had no power over this situation, that the youth were extraordinarily angry with them because they felt they weren't getting a fair share of the opportunity from this mine's presence. And this made them, the youth, particularly vulnerable to political radicalization and affinity towards bad actors that were getting involved both for economic reasons on the mineral side, but for political and ideological reasons from a terrorist side as well. And at the end of the day, the company had an aha moment and said, oh my gosh, we shouldn't be confining ourselves to only engaging with the legitimate actors. We actually have to find a way to engage with the illegitimate actors too. Otherwise, we don't know what our risks really are. We cannot be prepared, and we are not effectively managing this situation for anyone. So figuring out how to engage your ASM stakeholders meaningfully, and the right ones, is absolutely key, and something that we always focus on when we do industrial mining advisory on this type of thing. The second thing is the presence of bad actors starts to split and affect the local community, because there will be winners and losers. We saw this in a West African mine where the artisanal mining situation had changed so radically in 5 years from something that was very manual to something where, with Chinese presence, there was so much cash and co-optation of local elites who had essentially decided It was do or die. The mine was going to come anyway. They may as well get the most out of it. And they were mining in ways that was horrific to the environment, that was disempowering and disenfranchising, in particular women, and creating a greater likelihood of human rights abuses for the women. And this was resulting in community tensions, but also frustration with the mine. Because the mine wasn't quite operating in full awareness of this situation. And that weakened their social license to operate. And then the third thing, very practically and very sadly, is that the presence of bad actors creates a higher likelihood of violence and harms within the community, but also against mining companies. And we have unfortunately had to work for companies where people have been harmed, either local people by private and public security forces because of the level of corruption and co-optation of them by bad actors, or the mining staff and personnel themselves, because in the course of trying to do their job, and actually as a result of not having the right bits of information about what's happening, are more vulnerable to attack and harm. All of this bringing reputational risks. So there's a really strong business case for industrial miners to do better, but they have said to me, we actually don't know what to do. We feel abandoned and isolated, and nobody is stepping up and giving us guidance on what to do. So in my final slide, I'm going to skip my calls to action as to what the ASM can do and what the governments can do in the interest of time. And we can touch on those in questions or when you get the white paper and we release that. But what I want to call for is for the IGF or others to establish a guidance for industrial miners on how to navigate bad actor influence in artisanal and small-scale mining. And I have an investor client who asked me exactly this question: what should we be looking for our miners to be doing? When we do due diligence on their ASM management, what should we be looking for them to have when they do ASM management in relation to bad actor influence? And so these are the 6 major categories that I just brainstormed and I hope may be instructive and inspirational for you today. The first is, if you have leaders at your site that aren't realistic on the extent of ASM, the nature of ASM, the nature of the connections of ASM to bad actors, or who may be blasé about it and overly confident, then you're going to struggle with this. So you need to have the right leadership that's taking the issue seriously. At the root of all risk management is having the right management systems. We very rarely see mines that have created their management systems in accordance with the OECD guidance for responsible business conduct and their 6-step framework. And that's something that we encourage mines to do because it gives them a really strong handle on controlling ASM risks, both for them and for the ASM and their stakeholders. And a very important part of that is really preparedness, so that should a situation escalate, they can respond in a way that is rapid and agile, but that is unlikely or less likely to generate human rights abuses, because some of the tragedies that we have seen come from an unprepared mine finding themselves in a situation, and either the public security forces or private security forces or mine site forces just get it wrong because they've not got quite the right protocols and procedures in place. The third thing is, you're only as prepared as the quality of the information you have. And if you're not engaging the right stakeholders in the right ways at the right times, you're not going to be gathering the information you need. So it's not enough to just rely on one situational analysis or one audit. You need continuous information gathering from your exploration teams, your ASM management teams, your migration management teams, your community liaison officers, your state security. This is a group panel effort to keep the mine well informed of what's going on and be ready. Then there are a range of mitigations you can take to really focusing on how do you help bring greater stability and resilience to the community, both politically, socially, and economically, because a more resilient community is going to be more resistant to penetration by bad actors. So investing enough in community development and building trust and the social license to operate is a hugely important part of this. The fifth is collaboration. We have worked in numerous territories where mines are surrounded by other mines and they're all dealing with the same issue, and they may be just about talking to each other, but they're not collectively planning and responding to it. So we need people to take more of a territorial approach to bad actor management in ASM with other miners or economic operators in the region. And then the fifth, and the place where I know the World Gold Council is doing a lot at the moment on their program on tackling illicit financial flows, is through international diplomacy. But whereas their program is them as an organization engaging international actors to take action, what I'm talking about is if you're a Canadian miner in a conflict-affected region, you need your embassy to be supporting you to do government engagement there. And potentially international government engagement if you have bad actor influence from state forces elsewhere, to really find some solutions to mutual benefit to stabilize what's happening. So that's me, Jonathan. Thank you for the opportunity and the time to present. Please contact me, everybody, if you'd like to learn more about the white paper or anything that we've done. And I look forward to taking the discussion forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Estelle, for sharing your perspective and the perspective of Levin Sourcen and of the work that you've been doing on IFF for the past few years. There are a few questions in the chat, so please make sure you type them in the Q&A tool so that we can take them as soon as we start the Q&A session. Now we're going to turn to SwissAid. Ivan, you have been working on tracing gold. You have published, or you've been working, we've published several reports in several countries, reports called On the Trail of African Gold. And now you'll be telling us more about what you've been up to during the past few months and which countries you've been looking at in your recent research. So over to you. Maybe in the interest of time, we're going to try and recover a little bit from our little year. Thank you. Over to you, Ivan.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'll do my best. And thank you, IGF, for the invitation. So we are SwissAid. I'm here. Yvan Schulz is my name. And next to me is my colleague, Marc Hummel. I'd like to stress that we're a Swiss NGO. We're not a government sector, despite the name that sounds a bit similar to USAID, but we're really civil society. So what we'd like to tell you about today is our study on African gold flows that we've embarked on 4 years ago, and that has kept us busy so far. The objective of this study is to quantify the production and trade of African gold in order to better combat illicit flows. We're really trying to show how much gold is escaping the control of African governments, and that should allow these governments to calculate their revenue loss, and it should also allow a whole range of other stakeholders to make the actors in that trade accountable. So we've published a report last year entitled On the Trail of African Gold. I'll be telling you about this report shortly. And we also have a website. You have the URL here, on which we publish country-specific analysis. So we go deeper into the specificities of each country on the website, but the data regarding the whole continent is to be found in the report. You can find a link to the report on the website. And I should mention as well that the report is available both in English and in French. So a short word on the methodology. We did data cross-analysis using several types of data. We looked at imports of gold into African countries. We looked at those countries' gold production, both large-scale mining and artisanal or small-scale mining. We also collected data on exports of gold from African countries and on these exports mirror image, that is, the imports reported by the partner countries. So we compared the exports with the exports mirror image. That is called trade gap analysis usually. We went a little bit further in that we also triangulated that with imports and production. So we think that our study is a little bit more reliable than other trade gap analysis you can find out there. We also looked at both declared and undeclared flows. So for instance, for production, we used estimates of undeclared ASM production, and we have done that for all African countries, even for those for which very little data is publicly available. So we really have quite reliable figures for the whole African continent. Now, this is what it looks like. So for each year here, you have 3 bars. The left bar, left-hand side, is made up of 2 segments, green, dark green and light green. The dark green segment is declared production in that in the whole continent here. And the light green segment is an estimate of undeclared production. Then the column in the middle, the bar in the middle, the light blue one, is exports. So African countries' gold exports total. And the run on the right-hand side is the corresponding imports reported by the partner countries. So what you can see here is that the left-hand side columns are higher than the middle columns for almost every year, for over every year, actually. That means that not all of the production from Africa is declared as export. And then you can also compare the middle column to the right-hand side column, and then you can see that most of the gold from Africa that is declared for import abroad is not declared for export in Africa, or at least a significant part. So that is a red flag for smuggling. If we look at production data, we see that more than half of the gold production in Africa comes from ASM and is not declared. So here you have a figure in dark green that is total production of gold in Africa in 2022. And the two lines below, light green ones, are a high and a low estimate for undeclared ASM gold production. So you can see that if we take even the lower one, we're around half of the total declared production. So a lot of ASM gold in Africa is not declared. Looking at this more closely, we see that, so looking specifically at ASM, we see that most ASM is not declared. So each year we calculated that between 321 tons and 474 tons of ASM gold are not declared in Africa. We calculated that on the basis of all the estimates we could collect. So this range corresponds to 80% of total ASM gold production in Africa, or 41% of total gold production, so including LSM gold. So it's a very considerable portion. This is a breakup in according to country. You can see the largest gold producers in Africa: Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana, and so on. We observed that in 9 African countries, undeclared gold production from ASM exceeds 20 tons per year. This is a comparison between the declared ASM gold production and the undeclared ASM gold production. So you can see that in 33 African countries, 75% or more of ASM gold production is undeclared. So the vast majority of ASM gold is undeclared in actually most African countries. Now going over to trade, so exports mainly. Here you see the evolution of total gold exports from Africa. You see that ASM, or that is not represented on this graph, but you can find it in the report. We observed that 80 to 85% of ASM gold is shipped to the UAE, so to the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, in other words, while industrial gold from Africa goes mainly to South Africa, Switzerland, and India. So the countries of destination are not the same depending on whether you look at ASM gold or LSM gold. And intra-African trade is relatively low. It's only 20% of that total trade, and it's a lot of industrial gold going to South Africa. Here is a breakup into countries of origin. As I said, you can see the main gold producing countries here. Those graphs are all in the report. You can go and have a closer look if you want. This is a quite important and complex calculation we did. We tried to calculate the amounts that are smuggled, that were smuggled in 2022 out of each African country. And we found out that 12 African countries are affected by the smuggling of more than 20 tons of gold per year. And you can see those countries are in particular Mali, Zimbabwe, Ghana, and so on. If we look at where this gold from Africa is headed, looking at the figures reported by the importing countries, we see that the United Arab Emirates play a very important role. As I said before, they're the importers of most of the ASM gold from Africa. And then you have South Africa, India, Switzerland, and so on. And they're mostly importers of industrial gold, as I told you just a while ago. Now, if we compare what the importing countries report to what the producing countries and exporting countries, so what the African countries report, we see that there is a huge gap, and that gap is consistent over a decade. I mean, is there over a decade. It varies, but it's always there. The light blue line below is what African countries reported, all of them together. And the dark blue line at the top is what importing countries, so those are non-African countries, what they reported. If you take 2022, for instance, which is the last year for which we had complete data in our report, you see that the gap is more than 435 tons. That is basically gold that was smuggled out of Africa, not declared for export, corresponds to 30.7 billion US dollars. And that gold went in priority to the UAE. So here you have the trade gap for each importing country. You see that the trade gap is huge for the UAE. So once again, light blue are the exports reported by the African countries, and dark blue are the imports reported by the importing countries. The gap is huge for the UAE. It's not nearly as big for Switzerland or India, which is once again linked to the type of gold. Switzerland and India import mostly industrial gold or large-scale gold gold from large-scale mining from Africa. This is a breakup into the various countries of origin, shows you which countries are exporting gold to the UAE, and you can see that almost all gold-producing African countries are represented. Now, if we look more closely at this trade relationship between Africa and the UAE, you see that the trade gap is once again present throughout the decade. In 2022, 66.5% of the gold imported into the UAE from Africa had been smuggled out of African countries. So it had been declared for import in Dubai, but not declared for export in Africa. And if we calculate for the whole decade, you see that more than 2,500 tons of gold imported into Dubai from Africa had not been declared for export. So these are really huge numbers. I mean, we're talking about 115 billion US dollars over a decade. You can see also that with these graphs, without going into details, just to tell you that this gap is present for many different African countries. We've represented here Mali, Ghana, Guinea, and Sudan, and we could have represented several more in the report. We have several more. So this gap is really problematic for a whole list of African countries. Now, if you look at the imports of gold from all African countries into the UAE in 2022, you see that for 21 countries, the gold declared as export is less than half of the gold declared on import into the UAE. So just to show that the size of that gap for many countries is very considerable. Now I'll head over to my colleague Marc, who's going to illustrate a little bit our study and give you more details on several of the countries we're focused on so far. And that's it. We'll take your questions at the end, please.
Thank you very much, Yvan. I'll be short and just show you some example because we are already a bit out of time. So this are research that we continue to do after the publication of the report last year, and we are still continuing to do analysis on some African country. We have already published analysis for 17 countries, and we will continue. Here you have the overview of the gold sector in Burkina Faso, and you can see for Burkina Faso that the production, so the formal production, what is declared, but also the informal production, everything which is on the left-hand side in green is higher than what is declared in the import country, which means that a part of this gold is smuggled to neighboring countries.
You have to click on the screen.
Here you have the example of Togo. You can see that Togo more or less do not produce any gold, or only a few hundred kilo of gold per year. They also do not declare any imports of gold, but at the same time, Togo is a really important transit hub. So we have seen that until 2018, they declare some export of gold, but then this has been reduced in 2019 to 2020. And then again, there has been a huge increase of importing particularly from the UAE, and you can see that in 2024, the UAE has reported more than 50 tons of gold imports from from Togo. So Togo is really playing a key role in this sector. Here you have the example of Niger. You can also see that what has been declared as import from Niger in 2021 and 22 has been much higher than what is produced in Niger. And for the other year, the production has been higher than what has been declared as import in the partner country. And this is quite interesting to put in relation with what happened in Nigeria. Because you can see that in Nigeria, you have more or less no gold which has been declared as export until 2020, 21, and part in 22, when it was the start of the first large-scale mine in Nigeria. But at the same time, you can see that over years there has been a lot of gold which has been imported by partner country, in particular again from the UAE. And when you put the both together, you can see that in 20 and in 21, when there has been a huge reduction about what the quantity of gold which has been imported directly from Nigeria has been reduced, but at the same time it has increased from Niger. And this is also related to the fact that at that time, a lot of gold from Nigeria has been smuggled to Niger. So it's always important to have a look at the whole region to understand the gold flows. Here we have the example of Guinea, which is also really interesting because you can see again that what is declared as import from the partner country, in particular from the United Arab Emirates, is much more higher than what is declared as export and as gold, which is produced in the country. And again, this is also a part of this gold is coming from a neighboring country. Same with Mali, where you can see, for example, in 21, where the quantity of gold from partner country has been much higher than what has been exported in the country and declared also in the country. And we know also the central role played by the purchasing officers in Bamako. And here, the example of Côte d'Ivoire, where you can also see that what is declared as import from the partner country is even less than what is declared as export. So this is due to us a part of the explanation is based on on the issue of South Africa, because South Africa do not report all their imports, and a part of the gold from large-scale mine Côte d'Ivoire is exported to South Africa. But you can see that more or less all the gold from ASM, which is informal, is not exported directly to partner country who report these imports, but is more smuggled, in particular to Mali and to Burkina Faso. So this is also a huge issue with Côte d'Ivoire, because Côte d'Ivoire more or less produces between 30 and 40 tons of gold each year. And here we have the data only until 2022, but we have seen also the most recent data from 24, and the legal export from ASM is less than 1 ton. For Ghana, you can also see this graph here. Of course, we all know what's happening in Ghana with the gold board. So here again, I think that for 25, the export will be much higher. But again, we should be also careful with, if the gold is legally exported, that does not mean that the gold has been legally produced. And even if it has been legally produced, that does not mean that there is no human rights violation or environmental degradation associated to it. So again, we should be very careful with this. And also with the gold board, we know that the due diligence, that there are currently a lot of loopholes, and that there's also gold from Galamsey, which is entering the gold flow and exported to the UAE and to India. And here we'll finish with Sudan, where you can see also that the production is much higher than what is declared as export and what is reported as import from the partner country. And this is based also to the fact that in Sudan, they have this regional gold market where a lot of gold is collected, and this is counted as production. But here again, given that this gold is not declared as import in the partner country, we also know that this gold is smuggled to neighboring country. And currently with the war, we know that gold from the RSF is mostly smuggled to via Chad, Libya, and gold from the south is more smuggled to Egypt. And from those neighboring countries, most of this gold is also going to the UAE. So that's it. Thank you very much again to IGF for this opportunity to present. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark and Yvon. Thank you for this very enlightening. I suppose you spend a lot of time going through a lot of spreadsheets. So it's very enlightening presentation. So now we're gonna go to Niger. Alors nous allons avoir maintenant une intervention de Madame Yaou Korgum Fatimata, qui est
We will hear Mrs. Yaou Korgum Fatimata, Secretary General on Mines in Niger. The Sahel region, which includes Niger, is facing lots of challenges when it comes to gold mining, illicit, illegal flows, and specific challenges specific to the area, leading to significant losses for the state. However, there are significant progresses that have been registered. Could you tell us more? Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, and hello, everyone. Thank you to the IGF for giving us this opportunity to take a snapshot of the issue in Niger and tell you about the recent progress. As you all know, Niger is part of the countries that have a lot of mineral resources, and artisanal gold mining started in the 1950s in Niger, but it used to be a seasonal activity. But gold mining really started in 1984 with the gold rush. However, the regulations did not follow. So this activity evolved mainly in an informal framework, which led to many issues, especially health and security related issues, and also the ones, tax evasion, tax fraud. So there was no regulation or framework. And in 2017, here in Niger, with the evolution of the activities, especially the fact that machines were being used and chemicals, the state had to create tax. In 2017, there was a new law which included the tax to regulate this gold mining, especially artisanal, and we created one specifically dedicated to ASGM and more generally gold mining. Before I continue, I'd like to focus to explain the regions where this mining happens in Niger. Our territory is very large, and one of the main issues is that those gold mining sites are very far away. We have four main regions in Niger, including the western region. And right now, this area is almost impossible to access for safety reasons. And gold mining sites are almost managed by the evil forces, because the public administration does not have access to this area for actual regulation. There's a big area called the Aïr Massive, the Aïr Jado Chibakatan region, and also the south. This main three areas are where gold mining is happening in Niger. These are some of the main sites. We have worked with 11 sources to identify gold mining sites. And we know, especially right now, with the increase of gold prices, that this is very intense. We wanted to share some of those pictures with you. This is the Mahadi site. The specificity of this site is that it's in an urban area, or at least where there's a lot of population. So we can see many women on the site working. In 2022, the IGF came in March, and we organized a workshop, a national workshop on gold ASGM and on illegal flows in Niger. And The main challenges we identified back then was the low level of declarations of production statistics and the lack of tax compliance from artisans. As you showed earlier, the declared levels were way too low in comparisons with the ones declared in Dubai. As main challenges, we also had the declarations, as we said, and the deterioration of the environment.
Du tout, les quantités même qui sont, je vais dire, ils n'ont aucune maîtrise en fait sur le travail.
There is no control on the labor conditions, and they're not aware of the dangers of gold mining on their own safety and health. So as I said, the fraud developed a lot, especially due to lack of safety on the sites. The conflict between mining artisans, the wars between them and landowners, and ultimately, this favored the proliferation of informal sites, especially in the Aïr region, which is a very remote area, especially far from the capital. So, focusing now on the work done by the IGF in 22, as we said, there was a work done here and lots of recommendations came out from this workshop in 22. So I wanted to tell you that there's been a lot of progress since that workshop from the IGF in 22, and most of those recommendations have been taken into account, especially regarding the improvement of governance. We needed to take the necessary measures to better frame and include ASGM into the economy of the country. You probably saw that the laws have evolved a lot in Niger. We adopted the 22 law called the Mining Act, which was then modified and complemented by a decree from 2024. And those reviews of the law were done in order to take a lot of concerns into account. During the workshop, you highlighted it, the assessment identified tax pressure, which led the artisans to try and overcome the law and not respect it and have a fraudulent behavior. And beyond that pressure from the tax system, there was no process, no procedure, and no presence of the state in the field. So when people were producing, they were just using other channels to take the product out. As I said, we reviewed this law. There was a new law, and the main innovation is that the taxes specific to gold were decreased. Now, the extraction and commercialization taxes have been lowered, which ultimately allowed the mining administration to get much more declaration, which led those mining artisans to become more formal. And from 23 to today, with the implementation of those new texts, we have seen lots of artisans becoming more formal. And actually, we had people who came to help the state, but despite those provisions, it didn't lead to much. The impact was not very perceivable. And now, thanks to those provisions, which was to reduce the taxes on extraction and commercialization, have been reviewed and added to another provision on mine administration, including the creation of mixed teams to track ASGM. Since 24, the Ministry of Mines has taken measures to send mixed teams in gold mining sites, because we understood that if we're not there, we cannot control what's happening. So the teams are going there to go meet those miners to raise awareness on the law and the activity itself and the new measures. And now we can reassure you there's been a lot of progress made in terms of mining concessions provided, and we are always available to receive requests. When it comes to declarations of production and payment of taxes, things have evolved a lot. When you look at 24, 25 and compare it with the previous years, there's been a lot of progress. So that's what I wanted to share with you as an introduction. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Yao, de nous avoir partagé, d'avoir partagé avec nous les avancées du Niger, surtout dans le cadre de réformes institutionnelles. Alors, nous n'avons pas beaucoup de temps. Je pense que we're going to skip the moderated discussion and go straight to the questions, because there are very interesting questions in the Q&A. And then we can also, what we're going to try and do with our speakers, I'll be reading out the questions, and please try to be as short as possible with your answer to allow us to go through all the questions that we have. And I'll be starting with the question number 1 in the chat. And the first one is, will the slide be shared? So that's more of a practical question for the speakers.
Sure, we can share our slides, no problem.
Excellent. Then if you send this to us, we're going to make sure that the people who have registered to the webinar receive the slides. Okay, then we're going to go to the next question. And the next question is from Abdelkader Abderrahman. And the question is, do we have any evidence of any link between ASM and terrorist groups in Ghana? I suppose this is a question that probably would go to Levin sources, which talks more about the security aspect.
Sure. I would like to refer the gentleman that asked the question to the work of the Global Initiative of Transnational Organised Crime. I think they've just recently published an analysis on the gold sector in Ghana. So I believe the answer could be in that report. But other than that, we have some anecdotal information, but I don't want to draw upon that because we've not had a chance to verify it. So I'd rather refer you to that published report at this point.
Thank you very much for that one. So we're going to go to the next question, and that is Hermel. And the question is, given the traceability system for gold are generally weak across many African countries and that ASM production is often undeclared, how are the UAE able to identify the origin of gold and report it as being imported from specific countries? So I guess this probably would be a question for Suicide.
Yes, thank you for the question.
So how is the EAE able to say from which country the gold is coming from?
Yeah, exactly. So the UAE, at the end, it's quite simple. They just rely on the person who is bringing the gold. So most of the time, it's people who bring the gold in hand carry, and it's just the last country from when the gold has transit that will be declared as a country of origin. So that's why we should always be careful, because you will see, for example, that gold which is declared as coming from Togo, which is declared in the UAE, in reality, it came from Burkina Faso or for Niger. Same when there is gold, for example, from Uganda or Rwanda, there is gold from the DRC, and same when you have gold from Chad or Libya. At the end, most of the time, it's Sudanese gold. So it works more or less like this.
But if I can just add something, in the case of the UAE, there are several reasons why we can assume that the data is relatively reliable. One of them is that there isn't any import tax on gold, so there isn't any incentive to hide the origin of the gold as well. I mean, if you look at our report, there's a full explanation on that. Maybe we don't have time to go into details here.
Thank you very much. The next question is, I suppose, Suicide again. even with the LSM, there is a variance in declaration. What does that reflect? Is that smuggling?
It's smuggling, but of course, we cannot exclude that it's smuggling. And sometimes we should also be careful about which LSM we are talking about. We have seen the cases, for example, also of the mining company, which are owned by the Russian, like Nord Gold. And given that they were under sanction, they could not export again to LBMA refineries in Switzerland or India, like MMTC PAM, or in South Africa to run refinery. So that's why they use one part of this gold has also been smuggled to neighboring countries. Sometimes also because there has been a reduction of the production. So we see fluctuation, but sometimes just because one of the mine has stopped production or another one has started, and this has changed. Also because of the direction, because if in the past they were sending their gold to Swiss refinery and then they just send it to South Africa, and South Africa do not report their import, that will also change. We have seen the case, for example, in Tanzania with North Mara mine, where in the past it was sent to MKS PAM, now it's more going to run refinery in South Africa. So there are a lot of factors who could explain it. But of course,
okay, so yeah, okay, then I guess we're going to go to the next question. So thank you, Mark. The next question is, are there estimates of quantities that are not even declared on import to the EAE, nor declared for export from Africa, entirely outside of these statistics? I guess this will be Swiss aid also.
Yeah, we cannot exclude them. We have seen in the UAE that it has not really been the case, even with the gold which arrive via private jet. Of course, we cannot exclude everything, but I think that the vast majority of the gold entering the UAE is declared. In other country, it has been really challenging. We have currently the issue with Turkey, because also with the specific law in Turkey, a lot of gold which is entering Turkey is not declared as import. But I would say for the other country like Hong Kong, the main trading hub like Switzerland, India or Hong Kong, also the majority of the gold entering this market are declared. And one of the reasons that there is no incentive for not declaring it because there is no taxes. So yeah, people simply declare it.
Yeah. Good. So now we're gonna go to the next question. I think we're maybe gonna be able to take one more. So we're gonna take the next, and it is, what are the entry points for engagements with the UAE on this topic? In countries where we work on this topic, it's known that the entire local value chain is linked to Dubai, and that ISM gold is refined in Dubai and returns presumably in part to the central bank. So I wonder what concretely can be done about this if the state is quite close to the EAE and benefits from that relationship. And what constitutes a bad actor? So maybe that's two questions there. So I think this is maybe a question for either of you.
Yeah, maybe we can start and then Estelle can add on this. Yeah, so on the UAE, I think, one key element is the collaboration, is to collaborate with them. I think as the producing country, I think it will be very important to engage directly with them, because if the gold is not declared as export in the country for where it is produced, then this gold most of the time is like declared when it arrives in the UAE. And by having a kind of agreement with the UAE, we have seen that Nigeria, for example, in the past has started to do this. And I think if the other will work on this with the UAE, exchange information, this will be really, really important. On the other, I think also it's the responsibility of a lot of stakeholders to increase pressure to the UAE. We have seen that when they were on the grey list of the FATF, they have put in place a new regulation which is based on the OECD guidance, but in reality, it's not really well implemented. We have seen some audit report published by some refineries, some non-compliance, but we do not know what's happened with the sanctions. So there is still a lot of issue with the UAE. Also, the fact that they are not putting in place sanctions, in particular toward gold from Sudan, even if they have an embargo now. Same with gold from Russia. So I think it's a responsibility of a lot of players, and also from the downstream side, we have also seen that, for example, Switzerland imported since the beginning of the year more than 300 tons from the UAE. We don't know where this gold is coming from. So there is also a responsibility from Switzerland, also from the LBMA, because it's also a Swiss LBMA refinery which is importing this gold. So I think it touches a lot of stakeholders who should engage, in particular with the UAE, but also with other trading hubs, to have this responsibility about responsible sourcing. Over to you, Estelle.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, Estelle, very briefly.
Very briefly, I think there's a role for international diplomacy and international action by governments and coalitions of governments and also coalition of industry to engage the UAE on this point, potentially through development of trading agreements, but also to help them develop a strategy that actually will improve their reputation, because unfortunately their reputation they have on this is problematic and works against, I think, what their intentions may be for the sector. On the question of bad actors, I want to clarify, indeed, bad actor is a subjective term, because, and it's locked into the concept that if we assume that the nation state is the legitimate structure through which human and economic development can be realized and the rights of citizens can be protected, then actions that work against the ability of the nation state to administer, govern, enforce the rule of law, and create the conditions for sustainable development would be seen to be bad. In that context, those actors that we identify as bad actors are the actors that work against those interests. And of course, in many jurisdictions, the interests of the state do not always align with the interests of the nation. So you do need to look at a situation very carefully and not always take a sort of black and white thing, and one person's interests is not another person's interests, and there's a point at which you have to decide what is right and wrong. Maybe not some non-state armed groups are later understood to have been legitimate in their tactics to seek to overthrow. One might look at South Africa as an example of this. So we really do have to be very nuanced in how we look at this and talk about it.
Thank you very much to all of you, to all the panelists. We are a bit overwhelmed with the questions. We can see there's a lot of interest. So maybe what we're going to try and do is in the post-webinar email, we're going to take all these questions, send it to the panelists, and when we get the answer, we can put it together in the post-webinar emails, and then we can have the answer. So we're very sorry for those who didn't have the opportunity to ask their question or to speak, but I think maybe in the future we can try, and since there is interest, to have another webinar on the same topic. Now again, yeah, thank you all of you and the speakers, and to everyone for joining us today. It was a very rich discussion. It has brought together different perspectives and years of experience between different actors. And we can also see that the diversity of views shared today reflect just how complex illicit financial flow is in ASGM, and how essential it is that we continue to build a shared understanding across countries, sectors, and institutions. Several important themes have emerged throughout this session. I guess first is the scale that we have seen the numbers presented, and the speed at which goals move through informal channels, and that requires coordinated actions that crosses border. Second, strong policy. They can only be effective if they are matched with institutional capacity. We see in Niger, for example, that there's progress that is starting to happen, even though there's still there's still some issue of security, but progress is happening. Credible enforcement is also important. And third, responsible supply chain and improved financial transparency cannot be achieved by government alone. So we've talked about large spectrum of actors, industry actors, civil society, traders, refiners, international partner. Everyone has a critical role to play. As many of you know, the IGF has been deepening its engagement on this issue over the past several years, and today's conversation will directly inform some of the next steps that we will take. We're also proud to continue our role as a sponsor of the Global Coalition for Action on Artisan and Small-Scale Mining that was announced during the IGF AGM, which brings together governments, companies, and international organizations committed to improve traceability, due diligence, governance across the mineral sector when it comes to gold. This coalition will aim to provide an important platform for collective learning and coordinated action, particularly on the challenges that no single actor can address on their own. So on behalf of the IGF, I want to thank you. I want to thank you all. I want to thank the speakers once again for the contribution, and all of you for your engagements from the Menzies survey at the beginning throughout the questions during the discussion. So now maybe John, you could pull out the survey. Yeah, so that's the survey, the QR code. It's very important for us to have a feedback from you. So we kindly ask you to take a moment to complete the survey. It takes about 3 minutes, and your feedback is extremely valuable. It helps us to refine and improve the way in which we organize our webinars, and to ensure that future events continue to respond to the needs of our country members and partners. So please take a few minutes, scan the QR codes, and yeah, thanks again for today. And we hope to speak to some of you again very soon. And we wish you a very good rest of your day.